Okay, I'm back again for a second hand. Again, this is 100 NL on Ignition. And this hand starts out pretty standard, folds me on the button with Jack 10 of clubs. I open just 2.5x, standard open slice from any position. I guess I can make it 3x, but that's not really... on the button, I can make it 3x. That's not really important, though. It folds to the big blind, and he 3-bets. And just looking at this player, again, you know, short stacking and kind of 100 hands is still not a lot, but like this guy's kind of more loose than you would expect. And so with this stack size and with these stats, my first thoughts are this is a recreational player, and I think oftentimes recreational players, the next play I make is a recreational player is just massively underbluff a 3-bet out of the big blind, right? I think a lot of the time when recreational has a bad hand that they'd, you'd normally turn the bottom of your calling range pre-flop into a 3-bet bluff. I think a lot of the times recreational players and even regs will just see that they have a good price to just see a flop and they'll just call. And so they either have a very bad hand and they've somehow managed to turn that into their 3-bet bluffing range, or what I think often happens, they just call with those hands and then they just purely 3-bet value. So including this hand, this guy does have 2 3-bets out of the big blind, so that might not always be right in this case, but just my general read and kind of how I felt in this hand, that's how I assumed this would go. And I think this is a pretty standard flat on the button. I think in position, Jack 10 suited. Even against like a strong range, I think we just have to call. Just too good of a hand to fold in position. I think out of position, maybe we can fold if we know this is a nuts. Or maybe even against a reg that we know has bluffs, maybe this out of position becomes a 4-bet bluff. I haven't really looked at the Monker sims to know what we should be 4-betting. I know it hates flatting out of position, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some 4-bet bluffs in there that I don't expect, but I would probably just call anyway. It's a pretty hand, and how can you fold a pretty hand? That said, we see a flop of 10, 8, 6, 2-tone, which is an interesting flop. He decides to check, which is interesting. I haven't looked at the Pio. I've run the sim, it's ready, but I haven't looked at the flop strategy for either of us. I would assume this is a check from him a lot. I think this is going to be a pretty dynamic board right on a 9 or a 7 turn. Things change a lot. On a diamond, equities can change a lot. And if he has, aces, kings, queens, he's going to check. I'm going to have a fair amount of bets here, and I'll be setting up for the check raise. Or the check call, or however he wants to play it. But I think on this board, when equities can change so significantly on the turn, he'll either check, setting up a check raise, or check call. Given my pre-flop, I guess, kind of read, I don't know, and I don't even know if it's right. I assume this is a pretty nutted range. I assume this is probably a lot of overpairs and like ace, king, ace, queen. And so I was expecting to get check raised here a fair amount. With a gut shot, I don't have a gut shot, sorry. But with this hand in particular, with no backdoors, I should probably be betting. But I just kind of wanted to pot control, which I think is a mistake. If I had Jack 9, I think, or if I had 10-9 or 10-7 suited, and I'd peeled, I think that those are much better checks because they have the gut shot equity, right? But this hand doesn't really have a gut shot. What's the point? So I can bet fold here, I think, pretty comfortably against population, but obviously I'd be getting massively exploited if I fold to ace, king of diamonds, or I don't know. If he is 3-betting linearly with 7, 9 of diamonds, ace, 5 of diamonds, those types of hands, obviously folding is a disaster against those. But I don't think that's going to happen. That said, I should have bet, and I think this is mistake number 1. I check back. Turn is probably the most interesting turn card in the deck, other than the 9 of hearts. It puts forward a straight out there, and I think this is just massively better for my range than his. If I think he's really only got overpairs and ace king, I just don't think he ever has a 9. I have a lot of 9s here. I'd be checking back 8, 9 of hearts, 7, 9 of hearts, ace, 9 of whatever. Ace, 9 probably not of diamonds, ace, 9 of hearts. I mean, basically, I have a lot of like pair plus straight draws, pair plus gut shots. I have a lot of two pairs here with 8-7, 6-7 type hands. So yeah, I think this is just a much better turn card for me than for him, which kind of surprised me when he leads out. Right now, I'm thinking his story isn't really adding up. I guess he was setting up for the check raise in the flop, and now he's just betting with an overpair, or he's spazzing out. I don't really ever think he has a 9 or 2 pair. But obviously when I check the flop, I think I have to call, especially now that we do have a gut shot and we can improve even if we are behind. And we can maybe call down on brick runouts. It depends. There's not many good runouts, right? Like if it's the king of spades, are we really happy? We'd probably have to call, but we're not thrilled. But anyway, I do make the call. I think checking flop really throws my range for a loop here, right? And like I don't know what this is just why I'm reviewing, because I think this is just kind of like I've lost myself on the flop, and now like I feel like I can't fold, and this is just like not how you're supposed to play. You're supposed to know your ranges and know which hand you're check calling with and betting with on the flop, and it just makes it easier. The river is about as good as you can get if you're hoping for a brick. It's the 3 of clubs, and again he bets 2/3. I mean, it's just like I'm thinking to myself, I don't think he ever has a 9. I don't think he's 3-betting linearly, so I don't think he has 6-7 suited, 7-8 suited, 10-9 suited. I just don't know how many hands beat me. I think maybe to a recreational like 4 to a straight, and he's just turning ace king into a bluff, or ace king of hearts, ace king of diamonds. I was going for a check raise. Yeah, I just didn't see many hands that I would consider to be in his range that I lost to at this point, and I just put in the call. I think this hand is pretty poorly played from my point of view, and I think it just kind of went off the rails on the flop, and then on the turn I had no idea what I was doing, and then it just kind of developed into, well, everything bricked, and I have top pair, and I checked it back on the flop, and I blocked Jack 9, which is nuts, but that's not really relevant because he'll never have Jack 9. I have a lot of worse hands here. I have a lot of draws also, and so when I actually have top pair that I've checked back, I should probably be calling. And I didn't really know what he repped, but I did make the call, and he does show pocket 9s, which I guess makes sense. I think that this is probably the worst pair he's 3-betting pre, if I'm assuming he's 3-betting pretty much only in the nutted hands. But this does make sense, actually. I am surprised to see him check it without a diamond. I think I would probably check call it with a diamond, and just go ahead and bet without one. Because I have a lot of just like random overpairs. I have flush draws, and it sucks if you go bet, I jam, and you have to call, but that's just life. And I'm probably not jamming a 10 here very often, other than like ace 10 or 10x of diamonds, so no worries. But yeah, I did lose this hand, and I think, again, it's probably because I played it poorly on the flop, and this should just be a bet. He'd call, assuming I bet, he calls, turn is this, and I'd probably bet again, he'd probably raise, and I have no idea what I'd do then. But that would be probably a better line, I think. Anyway, let's go to Pio, and I think it's important to know the ranges. So this is the range I gave the big blind. As mentioned earlier, I didn't think he would have many bluffs here. I think I'm going to be 3-betting linearly, so I'm going to be including hands like 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited, Queen 10 suited, all these types of hands that are just strong hands that perform well in 3-bet pots. But I don't think many people at 100 NL, because it's kind of a lower stake, are going to be doing that. So I gave him a pretty nutted range. He's almost definitely 3-betting aces through 10s every time, and 9s finds their way in there sometimes. Ace 10 offsuit, ace jack offsuit, king queen off. These hands are kind of like can be played as either. And, ace, king, ace, queen, I'm assuming will 3-bet all the time. But, I have seen ace, king, and ace, queen just be flatted pre. But I think this is a pretty safe range for what I assumed my opponent's range was at the beginning of the hand. And then this is what I'm continuing with. I think if I thought this player could be bluffing, I would be turning some of these suited aces into bluffs, maybe some worse suited connectors into bluffs. And I'm just happy to 4-bet get in aces, kings, queens. And jacks, I mean, if this person is only 3-betting 10s plus, jacks is just going to be like a 4-bet side call, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine flatting jacks on the button to a blind 3-bet. But I guess I gave myself 25% in case the guy was an Ubernet. And these hands, I guess I can flat. Like ace 9 off is like pretty mediocre. I don't know. But again, in position, I don't really know how bad it is to flat these hands. So, especially the suited ones, they play pretty well. So, this time around, I gave a 1/3, 2/3 and pot size bet on the flop, some check raise size from me, and a check raise size from him. And then on the turn, I went 1/3, 2/3, and an overbet sizing on the turn river, because I think this type of board is going to be pretty interesting, and there might be some overbets involved. That said, so first thing is, one thing that's surprising to me is that out of positions equity is so much better, but I guess because they have just all the overpairs and no bluffs, really. So their range is just super strong always, which makes sense, right? If they had some bluffs like 6-7 suited, it gets different, and it probably becomes much closer, and maybe probably favors in position. EV wise, yeah, I don't, off the top of my head, I think this is 56 times 17 is what, 8.5 plus 2. So yeah, I mean, this is about equity times pot size, right? This is pretty close. So position isn't really helping me that much, which is also kind of interesting to see. Yeah, I guess I just have all this junk that just like flopped nothing. But yeah, that makes sense. And against this type of range, we aren't doing that great, even with top pair. So anyway, let's go to the strategy. Okay, first thing that's surprising, I would have figured this was a check because of how dynamic the board is. Like obviously a 7-9 or diamond, this range is in a lot of trouble. But Pio doesn't think that way, and I guess it's just betting, since you're betting every time with your overpairs and your bluffs, the higher your betting frequency, the lower your bet sizing is, which makes sense, I guess. He didn't bet, he checked. Yeah, and I think this makes sense too. It is nice to see that you are checking this sometimes. This wasn't like a randomization play from me. I just checked it back for pot control. And I'm definitely not checking, I can see why I would bet with Jack 10 of diamonds. I just have heaps of equity against everything, right? It's interesting. I don't really get why Queen 10 is a bet and Jack 10 isn't. I would guess it's because he always has ace queen and not always ace jack. And so I kind of unblock, or with a Queen 10, I block his continues, or I block his give ups. Whereas the Jack 10 doesn't always have ace jack, so I block less of his giving up range. But I check back. So the turn was, what, the 7 of hearts, which is a super interesting card because it just kills his equity, right? He has 29% equity here, and I have 70% equity, right? Like, I just have all the equity in the world. I have a gut shot, I have top pair. Him checking, since he's never supposed to check his overpairs, is, which is weird to me. But this turn is just so much better for me, which I kind of figured would be the case. Yeah, his EV out of position is just so bad, and mine is super good. But he does bet 2/3. And we have a call. Yeah, and we're calling every time with Jack 10 of clubs, which makes sense. The river was the 3 of clubs, which is probably better for him. A lot of my draws miss. I guess it improves his equity, but he's still in pretty bad shape. Makes sense. My EV is better, yada yada. He does bet 2/3 again, and yeah, I mean, it's just a call 100% of the time, which I guess makes sense once it's gone check on the flop. But I kind of want to rerun this to see what happens if he follows how we're supposed to do this with, or not supposed to, but if he goes the balanced approach with a bet of 1/3 on the flop. Jack 10 of clubs, very easy call. 7 of hearts. Interesting there's no overbets. I would have assumed it'd be overbets. But yeah, it does make sense. He's just betting all of his 2 overs with a flush draw. Interesting, king queen of clubs finds its way in here. I guess this is just like, man, I don't get that. And on the flop, I'm really only raising my sets and straights, and I guess my combo draws. Makes sense. Sure. He's betting a little bigger on the turn here. He's betting about 2/3 pot, which makes sense. Especially with 9s. I am surprised he's betting with jacks and queens and kings and aces. This seems like, I guess he's betting smaller with those hands and he's betting bigger with 9s. Makes sense. So he does this. I can't imagine folding Jack 10. Call. And then the 3 of clubs. I mean, this is just going to end up being a call because he could have, 2 overs of backdoor flush draw. I'm going to assume he's supposed to barrel ace queen of hearts here and give up with ace queen of diamonds. Like all these 2 overs with the backdoor flush draw are bets, and front door flush draws are just give ups. Yep. And he's even giving up ace queen of hearts sometimes, which makes sense. And yeah, so these hands with no flush draw in them, right? If he has like ace jack, he was drawing to a gut shot. These are good triples because they don't block my folding range of like 7-5 of diamonds, right? Like I have nothing there, and now I just have to give up. Which is interesting, but makes sense. And so when he bets big, Jack 10 suited is actually, okay, so Jack 10 of clubs is actually pretty close. It's actually a call only slightly more than half the time. But that is taking this line where it's gone bet, call, bet, which wasn't exactly what happened. And so I think much happier with my decision in game now to call the river, but less happy to not bet the flop. So we call. And so finally, I guess I want to go over what happens when he checks to me and I bet. How does this change? So let's say he checks Jack 10 suited, I bet 1/3. What's his raising? Okay, so he is just setting up for a raise here with everything. Except for 9s. And he's raising ace queen of hearts, ace queen of diamonds. That makes sense to me. And just having a give up here. Okay. But yeah, he's not checking that often, so that's interesting. I would have guessed this was a check from him, but I guess that assumes that since he's Pyle's going to see he really only has strong hands, right? He only has overpairs and like kind of nut flush draws and backdoor nut flush draws, so he's going to be betting a lot of the time and for a small amount. That is the hand.